So good morning. My name is Thea. I work at the Global Partnership for Education. And today I'm very to have this with the University of Berkeley of Education, who's going to be the complexity of transforming early learning standards of early childhood education. So without further ado, I'm going to Linda, who's signing in from California. So it's 3 hours before me, so it's 7 o'clock in the morning there, signing in so early in the morning.
Sure, thank you. I'm still, the sun is up, but it's still cloudy, so I envy all of you that already have the sun. So as Deepa said, I'm going to be talking about standards and moving from them to the classroom and what early mathematical competence might look like in early education. So the outline, I'm going to talk briefly about the importance of early childhood education and then the importance of early mathematical development. And my assumption is that I'm preaching to the choir here and that I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. Then I'll move to early learning standards and then school readiness assessments, and then zoom into mathematics as they apply to school readiness assessments, and then zoom back out and talk briefly about the use and misuse of school readiness assessments. So a background in early childhood education. So we know that entering knowledge and skills is highly predictive of later academic achievement. And we also know that family engagement achieved through connections in preschool can reduce the achievement gap. And identification of special needs, for instance, in the Central and Eastern Europe Commonwealth of Independent States, there's 5.1 million children with disabilities, and they have the highest rate of institutionalized children in the world. And providing services to these children early can lessen the deleterious effects of disabilities. Finally, in the news, both here and abroad, especially with President Obama's early childhood announcement in his State of the Union address, the return on investment visions of early childhood education is a popular topic. So I'm going to touch briefly on that. So this, I'm sure many of you have seen, this is Heckman 2006, was published in Science. This is return on investment at different ages along the lifespan, mostly the early 20 to 30 years. And as you can see, preschool programs give the biggest bang for their buck. So this graph reflects rates of return to human capital investment in disadvantaged children, and the declining figure plots the payout per year per dollar invested in human capital programs at different stages of the life cycle. So again, preschool is where you really want to start making a difference because it's most cost effective. This graph is of data from Sub-Saharan Africa, 2006 UNESCO data. And basically what it plots is the association primary school completion rates, which is on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is pre-primary or preschool gross enrollment rate. So you can see that there's a relationship that the more children who are enrolled in preschool in Sub-Saharan Africa, the greater the chance that they're going to primary school. And then another area where there's a lot of development going on is again the CEE-CIS, and this is gross domestic product dollars lost. This is data from 2008. And on the left-hand side of the graph, the numbers go, I'm not sure how big they are on your screen, but it goes from 500 million to $2.5 billion. And the bars represent dollars lost in GDP. And the reddish part, the burgundy part, is due to lack of preschool. And the purplish bluish part is lost to stunting and the like. So you can see it affects every country in the CEE-CIS, but differentially so. So now I want to switch to mathematical development. So in the US, Canada, and the UK, the overall biggest predictor of later academic success, defined as 3rd and 5th grade in reading, mathematics, science, this is from Duncan et al., is early mathematics. So mathematics that children possess going into kindergarten. And then this is a quote from Alan Schoenfeld, who's the head of NCTM here in the States. The mathematical skills that will enhance the preparation of those who aspire to careers in mathematics are the very same skills that will help people become informed and flexible citizens, workers, and consumers. So this is the importance of early mathematics. But it doesn't really stop there, because that builds the foundation for later skills that individuals need. And a functional democracy requires that citizens make informed decisions and that they're able to think for themselves and to judge independently, and this requires mathematics. And without a citizenry with the skills to support infrastructure and growth, countries and governments will be dependent on donors, NGOs, and foreign companies. That means if you don't have in-country skills in mathematics, you have to get them from somewhere, and it's going to be from the outside. And so the development of these skills requires mathematics. So examples of some of these decisions are voting decisions based on how politicians or parties have performed, for instance, on inflation, health delivery systems, corruption, HIV/AIDS treatment, employment, and the like. So now I'm going to switch to early learning standards. I feel like I'm switching a lot here, but it's a short webinar. So the vast majority of nations have some sort of early learning standards in place within their country borders. In the US, we have over 50 because every state decided that they have the best, and so they've created their own. In addition to that, we also have program-wide early learning standards. So for instance, Head Start in the US has their own early learning standards. The Global Partnership for Education, the World Bank, and the Aga Khan Foundation have recently been doing a lot of work in this arena. So early learning standards are the first step in aligned systems of curriculum, instruction, formative assessment, and then also teacher training. However, creating these aligned systems based on standards is complex. For instance, some standards may have over 700. I was working with a country that had 754 indicators, and I'll go a little bit more into what are in just a minute. Aligned curriculum assessment and teacher training to a large number of indicators is very difficult. Specific, each country has its own type of educational infrastructure. They are stakeholder reliant, so they require buy-in from a number of stakeholders, for instance, national, regional, local government, principals, teachers, and parents want best for their child. So they're very interested in what these might look like. And then finally, more than just a formulaic insertion of standards across the system. You can't just create standards and then plop them into a curriculum or teacher training program. They're just not that way. So the domains that are usually covered in early learning standards include physical development, health, social and development. In many cases, they into two domains. Language and literacy, those two are frequently put together in one domain. And then mathematics and cognitive development. Sometimes these are separate, and sometimes mathematics are subsumed in a cognitive development subdomain. So I wanted, so that everyone kind of knew what I was talking about when I start moving into school readiness assessment, I wanted to give an example of what a standard might look like and what indicators for that standard might look like. So standards, it's not that they're vague, but they're more umbrella terms. So this comes from one of the states in the US, not California. So the standard is sorts, orders, and describes objects according to characteristics or attributes. And the indicators of how people would know whether children have met this standard. Here's two of them for this particular standard. Child places objects in increasing order of size where the increasing unit is constant, for instance, unit blocks. And also child verbalizes why objects were placed in this order, such as describes process with both teacher support and multiple experiences over time. When I talk about indicators, I'm talking about indicators similar to those that are listed. So school readiness assessments. So first and foremost, the school readiness assessment is a formative assessment tool. This is not a tool to keep certain children out of formal schooling. So it's not summative. This is not an all or nothing at the end of a pre-kindergarten year where you either get to go to school or not. That's not what they're for. They're there to support and guide the implementation of early learning standards. So they monitor children's development, inform teachers and parents about the progress over the year before school and sometimes 2 years before school. They guide the teacher in classroom curriculum choices, and they help to provide for differentiated instruction. So each child is met where they are in development. And they also provide information to primary school teachers on children's development prior to school entry to ensure a smoother transition from preschool to formal primary school and continuity of instruction. In the US and many developing countries, these two systems are separate. preschool and formal primary school. So using a school readiness assessment can provide helpful information to the formal school system. So first, a clarification, indicators and items, the same thing. They're just the same word for one thing. They're used, generally speaking, in school readiness assessments as specific items to assess where children are on the standard. So basically what will happen is there'll be there's early learning standards, and the indicators are taken from there and put into a school readiness assessment. However, if these indicators are vague, they won't be similarly understood by all teachers, and nor will they measure the same thing if they're very vague, because people will interpret them differently. So I'll give you some examples of indicator learning standards so that you'll see what I mean. So some of the issues, in addition to making sure that the indicators are understood by everyone to mean the same thing, it's which indicators. You can imagine if there's 754, that's way too many. And which ones of those indicators are useful for really getting at the heart of children's knowledge? And then how do you rate children along these indicators? I want to zoom into mathematics as an example of these school readiness assessments. This set that I'm going to go over on this slide and in the next slide are some examples of indicators from early learning standards. And I want you to think about how you would determine if a child meets these indicators that I'm going to mention. These are from 3 states in the US and 3 developing countries, and they're all jumbled together. The important thing is, what I want you to think about is, would these be good assessment indicators or items? So the first one is uses numbers and simple operations. The second is uses number sense to solve simple problems, recognizes numbers and quantities in the everyday environment, works with teacher and small groups to represent mathematical relations in charts and graphs. And these are all number sense indicators. This slide has other subdomains in mathematics. So it compares objects in size and shape, asks questions and seeks new information, names 2-dimensional shapes, creates shapes, shows understanding of positional words, demonstrates understanding of the pre-number concept of spatial relationships, creates a pattern, and recognizes how much can be placed within an object. So what I'm hoping now that I've read this list is that you have an idea that not every standard can be turned into an assessment item. After all, how does one use number sense problems? To what quantity are we talking about? How simple of a problem are we talking about? What kind of a problem are we talking about? And how should children exhibit this knowledge? So things are, switch back to the previous. So this refers to this first bullet. This is very vague, and unless you know to what quantity, what kind of problem, it's going to be very difficult to try and measure children in different situations by different teachers the same way. So these indicators should be measurable, observable, predictive of later mathematical achievement, and teachable. So here's some solutions. These are measurable, observable, predictive, and teachable. These are not the final list. These are just examples of some of the indicators that have been used that seem to mean the same thing to more than one teacher, to many teachers. So it can count 10 objects, knows that adding to a group of objects increases the numerosity, can name 2-dimensional shapes with examples of what this means. So it means a circle, a triangle, a rectangle, a rhombus, a square, a hexagon, and an octagon. Uses positional words, and again has examples of what this means: up, down, under, on top of, bottom, inside, beside. And then uses non-standard words such as blocks, hands or feet to measure objects in their length and their height. So there's specific attributes in here, and this is a lot more than sense indicator that I mentioned below, numbers and simple operations. Indicators. There's some issues. Some of these very large. There's a low ratio, and there's limited time because of these two items, because there's a large class size and a low teacher-child ratio. So some of the solutions, a non-solution is to use all of the indicators. As I mentioned, up to 700 and even more than 700 is far too many. So one thing that I think it's important to keep in mind is to think about the total number of observations of each indicator teachers need to make. So if there's 20 children and 30 indicators and you're doing it 3 times per year, up with 18 observations over. That's a lot. However, 30 be almost tolerable for teachers, that they feel that they can actually assess children a year at 30. There's pushback on this, I think, because this is a lot of work and sometimes work in classrooms all by themselves, or many children, a couple of teachers. But 30 is an almost tolerable number. One of the issues with this is only 1/5 to 1/7 of the total. So if you remember the slide on the domains that are covered, math is only 1 out of 5, 7, or 1 out of 6. So if you have 30, that means that maybe 6, and that's not very many. Figure out how going across the board in all the subjects mathematics. So this is a real, I think, a real issue when school readiness instruments. How do we determine if a child has met a standard? Is an all or nothing rating. So for example, if the indicator is count 10 objects, there's a yes-no dichotomous rating. You can only monitor progress from not knowing how to count to knowing how to count 10 objects and nothing in between, because it's just count 10 objects and we say yes they can or no they can't. But if they can't count 10, we don't know if maybe they can count 7, which would be good and better than solutions to this is using gradations. So the examples here are from the states, developing countries. The first one, progressing limited skill, tiny Likert skill. It means that they can do it progressing. They're somewhere on the continuum, and limited skill, they have limited skill. The second one's very, except they use the word mastered instead of meets. Another one is can have any assistance, which means they've mastered it, can do with a little bit of assistance, can do with a lot of assistance, or cannot. And then another one is creating, building, developing, exploring, and discovering. And grading would mean that the child has mastered this because they can integrate it into other activities. And providing specifics. So for if while they're assessing can, for instance, write up to 13 if it's counting to 20, or up to 7 if it's counting 10 objects, or exactly which two-dimensional shapes the child can identify. So in this instance, circle, square, and triangle. So to sum up, the indicators must be measurable, observable, predictive, and teachable. The number of the indicators must be reasonable. Otherwise, the teachers just won't use the instrument, or they'll sit down on a weekend and fill it out, and it won't be a reliable instrument of children's abilities. The ratings must accommodate a range of abilities, and the use must support and guide implementation of early learning standards. So it should monitor children's development, inform teachers and parents about progress, teacher and classroom curriculum choices, differentiated instruction, and then again, provide information to primary school teachers. So now I'm going to zoom back out for a few minutes. So this isn't something that you do sitting at your desk, and certainly not sitting at your desk in the country. So iterative should be created with stakeholders. Since the Ministry of Education might be involved, the local education agency involved, principals, teachers, parents and families, and funders if there are funders involved. This is very important because otherwise you won't get buy-in, and this won't be implemented and it won't be used. So it's very important that iterative drafts are created with these organizations and individuals. So protocol for implementation of school readiness assessments. It's not enough to just create these school readiness assessments. You need to establish confidentiality and access rules and procedures. So for instance, the information gained from this assessment is confidential. This means that it should only be provided to those individuals directly concerned with the child's development. So pre-primary and primary schools, teachers, school administrators, and parents. Establish data use restrictions, and create language and cultural adaptations. Most countries have multiple language being used, as well as cultural differences that will need to be taken into account. And then teacher training modules need to be created. The use and misuse the instrument, but in addition on observational technology, they don't always have these skills. Involvement is important, so what this is used for. And then pilots need to be done to look at validity and reliability. And things get tweaked in the pilot because what you think and whatever who's on your team, and Ministry of Education, one thing, an indicator meant one thing, it may not mean the same thing in the field. So finally, the school readiness assessment is used for formative assessment. This means to guide classroom decisions during the year, to assess children's during the year, provide for differentiation as part of a child's portfolio that goes with them to school, in conjunction with a supportive and the early learning standards, also to identify opportunities and parents to work together. And perhaps even more, it is not to be used for is formative assessment, used to document children's progress, not their achievement of required goals a year. It is not to prevent children from primary school. This is sort of a, this is not something that can make a decision if a child is ready to attend primary school. It's not used to evaluate teachers, and it's not used to children in special class. Again, this is a blunt instrument. You need different types of instruments to assess whether children need special attention. And then it's not to be used to compare children or groups of children. Thank you for taking the time this morning.
I'm going to start my webcam along with your webcam.
Okay.
Excuse me. Hi, that I'm Deanna. My name is Deepa. It's the license, the Adobe Connect license is actually, it's under someone else's name in our organization. Reason why it shows up as Deanna. But Linda, that was a great presentation, and you have one question so far. And if anyone else has any questions, do type it into the chat box to Linda. So your first question is from Roy, who's from in Germany. She says, in industries, many parents are illiterate, cannot give their children a pre-medical knowledge that educated parents might. Given this factor, children from different socioeconomic backgrounds would with different knowledge. Is it really possible in developing countries where class sizes are huge to teach children with different knowledge bases in a differentiated manner?
That's a really good question. We've not faced that, I think, in countries, but in the U.S. as well, because we have the same issue with coming in with differentiated. I would say that there's two issues or two ways of thinking about that. One is that when you look at some of the data of interventions that have been the children who start at the very with the fewest of skills seem to get skills. So it's as if they are mentally ready but need the environment that. So the instruction, and I hate using the word preschool, the environment, mathematical development, move more quickly on the spectrum than children come in with more skills. With regard to differentiated instruction with very large, not solutions, but a couple suggestions. One is you can pair up peers so that you have a more with a less knowledgeable peer. Does mean that you have to figure out, you'll have to do formative assessment to figure out kind of where children are on the subdomains in mathematics. And the other one is instruction, so that some children who need more help with a particular subdomain, geometry or number sense, that have a bit more to work on those skills. The peer-to-peer, while that sounds somewhat complicated, I'm actually a bit, once you get it started quite well. And you have activities where one child can and work with the other one, and if they need help or suggestions, they tend to really like it. But I agree that this is a difficult problem. I mean, you've got one teacher and 40 children. It's very difficult. US, this is the exact same thing. A lot more money has been to early literacy. We had early reading in the States. It's also, I think, an skill for teachers to understand. There's many
and you have a question from
working in
Lena.
early literacy.
She says, Linda, that was a great presentation.
So in the U.S., reading
with respect to the development
world, there's a lot
of indicators.
And it's not that literacy isn't important. It's we're not as far along.
Assessment
part of it is funding. Part of it
indicators in early grade math
and
are behind those of literacy.
Teach these in a developmentally appropriate way so that it's not drill and kill and worksheets at this particular. So I think it's a combination of factors. But certainly in the world, I think the funding dollars have really kind of been funneled to early literacy. So there's opportunity necessarily. Although some of the countries, the last couple that I've worked in, have they've developed an entire set. So it included literacy and mathematics and socio-emotional, all of the domains there. So if they have early learning standards in place, that's a little bit easier. Oh, sure. You're welcome. Sure. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I had presented the development of a country-specific assessment at CIES in NOR. Seemed to be a very popular topic, which came for me because I love talking about it, as you can tell. I have plans to publish it in the CER. So, well, no, submit another story, but to submit to that journal.
Okay. Thanks, Linda. Other questions?
Okay.
From the audience? Okay, Tree and Lena both say thank you for answering the questions. There's one more question or comment coming. But Linda, you'd also mentioned that this this project would you're going to turn it into a paper, and that is that if you can talk a little bit about that.
Teachers, I would think. Generally speaking, what happens is that there should be, so the teachers should follow the child throughout the year, 2 to 3 times. 3 would be much better than 2. 2 doesn't give you a lot to work
Okay,
on.
so we'll,
And
we'll
then
look for it
in
hopefully
conjunction with meetings with
in the coming
parents,
year.
sometimes
It looks like
depending
there's one
on
more
the
comment coming. It's a
country
little
that
bit
you're
slow
in,
on
this
my
might be a
side.
custom or it might not be a custom. Um, Parents,
We'll just wait for a
some
few.
sort of numerosity that usually needs to be couched with a description of what this is, what that is. And actually, all of the teacher training comes with
Okay, maybe not.
in-depth
Okay.
descriptions of
I don't know if anyone else has any
the
other
assessment
questions, but
indicators
what we
mean
can
and
do
what the
is I'm
standards
going to have to
mean.
wrap this
So
webinar
I
up.
would recommend it
But
be done by
Linda,
teachers,
one
but
more
I think
question from
the
Lena.
parents should have access to it as well. They
She
should have
says,
access to the
Linda, another
standards that
question. When
consider
implementing
questions.
formative assessments at school entry level, who do you think is the best point of contact to implement this? For example, implement the assessments via parents?
Yeah, so parents hardly, sorry, I didn't hear that piece. Oh, feed the children? Oh, lead. Oh, lead. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that the same thing is that we do, I mean, the truth is that we do what we can with what we have, and we try to get more so that we can do more. Um, but again, try to meet each child where they are using peer-to-peer instruction. It takes creativity to try to do this in very large classrooms and to provide some of the environments that they might not have at home. And I think understanding what those environments at home look like, even in very poor communities, there's
Thanks,
home
Linda.
visits.
Juan has a question. He says, do you have
I
any
can't remember what
suggestions
country
related
somebody was talking
related
to
to
me about
kids?
where,
Sorry, excuse me. It just jumped for a second.
the
Do you
school
have
was
any
in a
suggestions
church, but the
related to
teacher
kids
with,
who
like,
live in
40
very poor
children, and
communities where
the teacher
parents
still found
hardly
time to go and
lead
visit
them?
all the
And I think
families
this
that
is kind of
he
building
had
on what you spoke
so
about
knowing what the
with
families,
Debashrie's question.
what their environment is and what their hopes and dreams are for their children, I think
Uh,
goes a long way.
So
And
when
also
parents
encouraging
can
the
hardly lead the
parents,
children,
once you've
lead,
kind of figured out where
I
their
guess
child is
take
in
care of
development,
them. Yes, yeah.
providing them with some activities. And these don't have to be complicated. Most parents can count to 10, can, whether it's, in Africa, sometimes it's bottle caps or pebbles or everyday items. And if the teachers can come up with activities like that they can give to the parents or tell the parents about, not give to them, that can help as well. Oh, huge. It must be included in teacher training. I think it's very helpful to teacher training, but it must be included, otherwise it won't work. Because teachers don't, I mean, standards can be quite complicated, especially if you have 754 of them. So it really has to be part of the teacher training. And if it's not pre-service, then it's got to be in service where, a trainer of trainers model, but it has to be part of teacher training. It doesn't work if it's not. That's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Linda. So you have a couple more questions. Joy says, hi, Linda, thanks for the presentation. What do you think are the implications of this project for teacher training?
Hello, Ellen Rose. Yes, so I have been working with the country, but the data and the progress that we've made so far isn't enough to do a webinar. But I think that would be great once I think they're in the pre-pilot stage, so, or in the middle of the pilot stage. So yeah, I think that would be terrific, especially because then you can see what it looks like. So all of this is sort of, I mean, it's not really theoretical because I did base it on actual standards and indicators. So, but yeah, I think that would seem good from the beginning to
And
the end.
Anne has a question. She says, very interesting presentation. Thank you. Could we have a webinar sometime in the near future which would use a case study to illustrate how these standards and indicators were set, process results, how the iterations went, and how teachers were able to use them? It would be great if this could be used in a developing country context. And Ellen Rose and Juan say it would be great to have a concrete example of how this is done as well.
Thank you.